Submission number 4371. The title is Data for the Night, Digital Rights, Trust, and Responsible Engagement with Data in 24-Hour Cities. My name is Jess Reia. I'm an assistant professor of data science at the University of Virginia, and I use they, them pronouns. Today, the main question here is, how much do we know about our cities at night? And to try to answer this, I have three main questions for us. The first one is, how does the lack of access to consistent data about the city after dark affects policymaking, urban governance, and also all sorts of advocacy activities? For example, question number two is, what are the harmful practices in data collection, publishing, assessments, and who exactly are they harming when we think about the city at night? And question number three is, how would an agenda for responsible, trustful, and ethical engagement with policy data for the night look like? And so this presentation has 5 parts. First, I'll give you a little bit of a background on who I am and where I'm coming from with this research and advocacy project. And then I'll address question number 1 in the second part, context, question number 2 in the third part, challenge, and question number 4 when we discuss some opportunities. And by the end, I hope to talk a little bit about the key takeaways of this presentation. So first, background. As I say, I work in the School of Data Science at the University of Virginia, but a significant part of this work was carried out at McGill University in Montreal, Canada. And in Montreal, I'm also a member of the Night Council from Montreal 24/24, a non-profit organization focused on advocacy for cultural policies and nightlife in the city. And I have a mandate since 2020, and this is probably my last year as a member of the Night Council. So the experiences I bring here, they're rooted on research and also advocacy. So it's kind of like combining these two universes. And it's a pretty interesting way to address this need for data for the night in contemporary cities. And I'll be talking mostly about this experience we have in Montreal, Canada. So here are some examples of activities I've been involved both as a researcher and also as a member of the Night Council. So we had night summits, multi-stakeholder events to talk about and address and try to give more visibility to issues related to nightlife in the city. We also made campaigns during the pandemic. Quebec and Montreal were under a pretty strict lockdown in 2021. So this La Nuit, La Culture Vie, at night culture lives was one of the campaigns we did in the streets of the city and online. We also held public consultations with citizens, trying to understand their needs, including the need for information and data about nightlife in this context of pandemic recovery. We participated in the process to create and develop a new nightlife policy for the city of Montreal, and also wrote all these reports trying to understand what we had in terms of data and information, what was missing, and how can we describe night, the urban night in Montreal at the time. So the approach that I use is transdisciplinary, public policy, and media studies, my degrees, but also I worked for many years at a law school, and I'm currently working in data science. So it's a quite interdisciplinary, non-linear background here. This is how I approach the subject of the urban night and data. And also I have experience in multi-country research projects. I worked a lot in Latin America, Brazil, my home country, in Canada, and now in the US as well. So I really like this kinds of comparative research. I truly believe cities can learn a lot from each other's experiences, whatever has gone right and things going wrong. These are all valuable lessons. And the frameworks that I use here for this specific work is rooted in critical data studies, night studies, and digital rights. That's fundamental rights in the digital environment. And so for the context, in our first question, what's going on? when you talk about nighttime governance, this is a notion, a concept that has been consolidated over the last 10 to 15 years. We experienced lots of conflicts in the night, mostly regards to noise, notions of public order, and also public safety. And so many different solutions started to emerge, especially governance mechanisms such as night mayors, night ambassadors, night czars, as is the case of London, UK. Some cities created night councils, all sorts of associations. So we have different degrees of institutionalization of governance mechanisms for the night around the world. There's no one size fits all model, but we do have best practices. And the public debate around night cultures, from night scenes, clubs, but also night shifters, sex workers, access to healthcare, and especially during the pandemic with lockdowns, like who has the right to inhabit the night. So these conversations have been ongoing for a while now. And what we saw specifically during the pandemic, not only in Montreal, but talking to people and advocates, researchers from other cities around the world, is the lack of data to really understand. We couldn't even understand how big the economic impact was on nighttime economies in Montreal, because we didn't really have access to data, open, public, reliable data to start to assess damage and plan from there. So this became a topic that I was truly interested at the time. And we launched this chapter as part of a broader collaborative open initiative developed during the pandemic to try to understand how can we recover from this internationally, can we learn from each other. And so this is chapter 7 that I contributed, trying to address capacity building, and the topic of data emerged again and again in one of the chapters of the nighttime recovery plan. Tries to see this kind of knowledge gaps and information gaps in terms of data. They are all available for download for free if you're interested in that website over there. And from this report, and based a lot on the work of Andreina Seijas and Mirik Milan, former night mayor of Amsterdam, they trying to understand that when we talk about nightlife, sometimes we think about parties and culture and entertainment industry, but it's like way broader than this. Imagine the city continues to operate at night, but differently. And we do have a lot of stakeholders and a lot of people involved in nighttime economy, from public transit to health to media to artists and other cleaning services and so many departments that still operate at night, and the city needs to be governed and managed at night in a way that's efficient, let's say, but also we should question this idea of efficiency, and I'll get there. And here, from the same report, you can see the main cities around the world that do have governance mechanisms such as night mayors, offices, or commissions. I always like to highlight the fact that, yes, it's mostly in the global north. That does not mean that the global south does not have such mechanisms or associations. They had sometimes for a while and then they don't have anymore, but many cities in Latin America specifically do have other mechanisms and other ways to address conflicts, issues, and potentialities of the night. So this is a starting point, but I always find it relevant to say that it doesn't mean that the global south is not thinking or creating this mechanism. They might just look different, maybe more fragmented than here. And then what I saw when I was working with these topics of night studies and having working with smart cities for many years, especially in Latin America and Canada, was how these two agendas were not talking to each other. There was not a very obvious overlap. And there are lots of problems in common, but we did not have an overlapping way to address certain issues. So we do have various approaches to urban intelligence. I usually prefer definitions that are not super narrow-minded. I really like the work of Shannon Mattern on this, that cities are intelligent in different ways. And as I said, I worked with smart cities, and even in cities like Rio and other cities that have control centers, dashboards, and all sorts of apps and portals, the night is still not a relevant subject unless you're talking about public lighting or safety, but it rarely goes beyond that. And there's like a lot of potential for you and us to think about night and data, night and technology. At night, and even with all the ubiquity of artificial intelligence, machine learning, big data in law and policy making these days, the topic of the urban eye is still a little bit marginalized. So we need to understand the city in real time, but there are all these gaps and the lack of data that help us nightlife advocates to look at this issue properly. So even with all this data, nights are still invisible in most open data sets in many cities around the world. And so here I want to talk a little bit about our experience in Montreal, Canada. Here I say Montreal is a fluvial island. It's located in the St. Lawrence River in Quebec. The metropolitan region has around 4 million people. And it's a city known for its vibrant nightlife, festivals, music scenes, cold winters, really long winters that impacts also how people will enjoy and inhabit the city during the day and at night as well. In here, it's a little bit hard to see this ecosystem. I created this to try to map all the stakeholders and topics that are relevant to think about nightlife in a city like Montreal. This can be adapted to other cities as well to showcase how complex a nightlife ecosystem is, because we do have things from sustainability and the discussions about, of course, climate justice and dark sky and light pollution, but also cultural institutions, museums, libraries, cultural centers. You have workers, formal and informal, working at night, all sorts of night shifters. And you also have entertainment from all sorts of clubs, cafes, music venues. You have food, convenience stores, restaurants, grocery stores, dépanneurs in the case of Montreal. You have like more regulations about like smoking and vaping and alcohol use in public or private spaces, drug use, gambling, all these things, all issues of governance. And here is the part about open data and open governance, all sorts of charters and night mayors and councils, committees that will impact this ecosystem. But we also have like all these are like public order, lighting, noise, transit and mobility. Do we have buses running 24 hours or until late in our cities? Is the metro running? We have unhoused communities, people in shelters, several topics and issues that need to be addressed and that we need to think about. And when we go to most data sets and open data portals, it's really hard to find information. And there are, of course, several challenges. And here, I want to say first that official numbers hold immense powers. And here we can look at the work being done by Dana Borge and Dan book about like official numbers and how powerful they are, census, but also all sorts of numbers that are collected officially. And of course, we have community-based data collection by researchers. And we do have a lot of regulatory frameworks shaping this data collection and also a bunch of gray areas. And the regulatory framework can be very difficult to navigate, and not always the data collected will be available. And of course, one of my main concerns in this work is how harmful it can be to just display certain information public. So when we publish our data sets about the night, we really need to be careful to not be exacerbating inequalities and creating problems for marginalized communities inhabiting the night, because we do have sex workers, people whose legal status might not be what the government considers to be legal. We do have all sorts of do-it-yourself spaces that we mapped, informal parties, informal spaces, informal communities that are not necessarily seen as legal or regular, and we can contest these notions, and we should most of the times, but also how can we make sure that people are not harmed? And we can think about unhoused communities, and I brought an example for us. So this trade-offs of visibility and invisibility in data sets, we must really think this through as researchers, as advocates, and as policymakers as well. So here you can imagine my frustration when dealing with our commissaire Noise in Night commissioner when we were working in this project and trying to design the new nightlife policy. And I asked for an inventory of the public information, the public data, open data we had about the night in the city. And I received this one-page PDF document that is not even clickable. You cannot even click on the link. So you can imagine how frustrating that was. But it's interesting to see, and some of these data sets are worrisome, like the one with the location of people, unhoused communities in certain neighborhoods of the city. And we try to talk to the local police service to understand like where and what kind of cameras we had in public spaces. They declined our request. We had conversations with the public transit agency to try to have more data made public about the system operating at night, like buses and trains and the metro. They said they didn't have the capacity at the moment, so you need to make a request to access information. So the things are, they usually have this information. And then we saw trying to put this inventory that's not super comprehensive. We tried to put this together and we ran into several barriers and problems, like no integration of databases and just like trying to understand. And most of these things, they don't want to make them public. And of course, the issue of responsibility comes back. Like some of these things should not be public and should be anonymized. And we should like really have like a more meaningful conversation about this. And then me and my team, we tried to map open data portals by keywords related to the night. We're really open and broad about this to see what we have, what was missing. Also trying to listen to the affected communities, and we learned a lot doing the public consultations with residents as well, and to listen to their concerns. Like we do want more open data for policy making, but we also want to protect people in their communities. Of course, ensuring no harmful technology is deployed in these spaces of nightlife spaces. And of course, we do want to make data available, accessible, reusable in a way that's both responsible and timely. And I think we really need to value community-based data collection about the night, because that's what we have to rely on for a long time. And I would like to see more local governments thinking about the night and the way we can collect this data. And so in the Montreal ecosystem itself, we mapped over 200 organizations and individuals, like over 40 from the government, civil society, and advocacy as well. Industry, and here we have from bars and restaurants open to later at night, research centers, researchers, think tanks trying to address the issues of like night, and preferably with some approach to data as well, and look at by keywords at the federal, provincial, municipal open data portals, look at other regulatory frameworks like the Charter of Principles for Data in Montreal, really trying to see like how we can move forward to this. And we have been talking to the city. We're in a panel together in the Night Summit, trying to come up with common solutions. And I'm happy that the city of Montreal is really open to discussing this with us, because this is like an example, and I'm sorry, it's mostly in French, about what is available for us and what is not. So it's not super helpful depending on the topic you're covering. And this last part, it's about opportunities. So how can we move forward with all this? And we do have like a huge potential to improving knowledge, bring attention to these issues, understand who are the stakeholders, what are their needs, what are our limitations, acknowledge all the ethical and trust limitations, because some people will not trust the government to collect data about them, and that's completely understandable. How can we work with this and respect people's privacy at the same time, and there are trust issues with the government, especially with marginalized communities in Canada. And of course, respect community-based data collection. And also another very important aspect of this process is collaboration. Invite people to the conversation decision-making process. Look around to see whose voices are not heard. Ask why. Invite these people to talk to you. We appreciate the efforts of the city during the nightlife policy development, but we missed a bunch of voices that should be there, should have be giving inputs to the process. Of course, creating and strengthening these networks. And of course, this all takes lots of resources. So we need to leverage the resources wherever we have, all the efforts we have, understand what kind of official and unofficial numbers we have, look at international examples, learn from each other, learn together, and of course, writing best practice and policy recommendations, avoiding this kind of like one solution will work for all cities, like all cities should have a night mayor or a night ambassador. Not necessarily, but they probably should have governance mechanisms, and we should talk about this. So the key takeaways I wanna talk about before I wrap up this presentation are it's about the importance of evidence-based policymaking, and we should have this conversation about having more data for policy for 24-hour cities, and that could help us advance many agendas. And I hope we can do this in a responsible way. The role of communities in measuring themselves, understanding themselves, and sometimes we talk about small data, not about big data. Is small data and sometimes big data as well. How can we understand all the missing links and the gaps in this process? Not everything will be reflected in the massive data collection of big cities like Montreal and Rio and Mexico City, New York, for example. So how can we understand whatever lies underneath or beyond the big data that we're collecting to understand the city, and keep having these ongoing conversations. And I'm a huge fan of working transdisciplinary multi-stakeholder networks of collaborators. And I would say, if you are interested in this work for the government or as a researcher, advocate, activist, and you have interest in this, please reach out to us. Be very happy to talk to you about this and create and foster this broader international networks to think about data and night in your city. Thank you very much.